Have you ever been stumped trying to figure out how to process a phone call? Well, today we're going to talk about that. What's happening, podcasters? I'm Brian Ensminger. I'm a podcaster and a podcast editor, and I want to see you be successful with your podcast. This question came up in one of our Facebook groups. It was actually in the Hindenburg users Facebook group. You can find us at hindiusers.com. That'll redirect you there to Facebook. And if you answer the questions, we'll go ahead and let you into that group. But this came up in one of our groups. Someone was asking, okay, I've got this phone call that I'm editing. How do I edit it to make it so that the voice is more intelligible and sounds better? If you've never done this, it can actually be a bit of a challenge, especially if you're not quite sure what the limitations are of editing a phone call, because the fact is you're never going to make it sound as good as a studio microphone in a great studio. It's just not going to happen because it's a phone call. So I didn't have a tutorial to share, so I shared some insights and some thoughts, and some other people jumped in, but I wanted to go ahead and make this tutorial to show you how to do this. And in this particular case, the person asking the question didn't have any extra plugins. They just had what came standard in Hindenburg. So I'm going to show you how to do it with the tools that come standard in Hindenburg. If you use other software, the principles will apply, but you'll have to use the plugins differently depending on how they work, because I'm not quite sure how they work in your particular software. So we're going to go ahead and take a look in just a few seconds at a phone call that I was given permission to use. This phone call came from Esther Littlefield with the Christian Women Leadership Podcast. You can find her show at estherlittlefield.com. She gave me permission to use this particular phone call. It was actually a call that they had started on Zoom. The guest was disconnected and had to dial back in on the phone. And so we're able to use this because Esther let us do that. So Esther, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and show my desktop. I have open a session with the phone call that Esther sent us. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out so that we can just take a look at it. And we're just going to talk about the basic characteristics of this first. So you'll notice that there's not a lot of volume variability. There's a little bit of an up and down, but by and large, it's basically a flat line. What that means is that, like any other phone call, this particular phone call was very compressed from a dynamic range. So if you're not aware of that, phone calls are compressed and squished and squashed like a Skype call, except worse, right? So they're very compressed in terms of dynamic range. And that's done for a variety of reasons, and I'm not sure that I'm aware of all of them, but that's how it is, right? The other characteristic of a phone call that you can't see in this particular view is that typically phone calls are lacking in the lower frequencies. Generally, there's not a lot between maybe 150 to perhaps 300 hertz. It actually varies just a little bit based on the kind of phone and the connection that you have and some other variables. So it's not always exactly the same. High def phone calls are higher quality, but you're not going to have a lot of that low end. So a voice like mine is going to be missing that low end. It's just not going to be there. By the same token, you're also missing a lot of the high end in a phone call, and we'll hear that when we play it. Depending on the kind of connection, generally there's not much, if anything, above that 3,500 hertz range to maybe 4,000 hertz, depending on the kind of connection that you have again. And that's the voice part that's sent through, but when it's going through phone lines, it picks up noise. There are artifacts generated by the compression. There's also noise on the phone lines, and so you will have frequencies above that 3,500 or 4,000 hertz range, but it's primarily going to be noise, and same with the low end. There's going to be some noise there. So when we process this, what we're going to try and do is remove any of that noise that's going to be above that frequency. It's not typically going to be audible, but it's just going to help clean it up a little bit. We're going to do the same with the low end, and then we're going to do what we can to increase the intelligibility. When I'm working with this file, I'm only going to use one plugin, okay? There's no reason to use a compressor. The only thing I'm going to use is an equalizer. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in to the beginning of this section. So this is the Hindenburg stock equalizer, and I've just pulled up the basic settings that it comes with. You'll see that there is a high-pass filter. That's this blue thing right here, and that represents on this line what it's doing to the equalization. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. If I turn this off, we'll lose that high pass or the low cut filter. And then I'm going to go through each of these bands. So we've got the low frequencies, and you can see that that's a shelf. So when it raises the frequency, it keeps it basically flat for every frequency below that. Same if you drop it down. We've got the mid frequency that's a bell-shaped curve, and you can raise that or lower it also by clicking on it and moving it. And then if you hold down the shift key, you can change the sharpness of that curve, flatter or sharper, reset that to 0. Just double click to reset. Then the high frequency is also a shelf. You can see I can drag that frequency, can move that up or down, just like we did the other one. And if I hold the shift key, I can make it into a parametric EQ like the mid frequency and move that around, okay? So that's how it works. And then if I apply a shelf on the low end and then put the low pass filter, then it adds those two together and it comes up with a curve that works with all of those. If you've worked with an equalizer before, you're familiar with that. Just quick run through. I'm going to go ahead and clear the equalizer and bring it back in. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the high pass filter, and we're just going to start equalizing. The first thing I'm going to do is try and remove any of that noise that might be above those higher frequencies that are returned in the phone call. That's going to be somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 hertz. It's going to vary a little bit. What I'm going to do in order to do that is I'm going to take this high frequency, I'm going to drop it down to basically the bottom. Then I'm going to move it until I hear that it starts cutting into the top frequencies, and then I'm going to back it off a little bit, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and hit play.
All right, so I think I'll rewind. And like I said, I'm really good at telling long stories, so please feel free to jump in and tell me to trim it up. And, you know, God bless the editor who does the audio. But I think my leadership...
Okay, so that's about where I stop hearing it cutting into the voice. So I'm pretty good with that. It's not going to necessarily get all the noise that's above that range, but it's going to try and get us pretty good. And that's at about 4,500 hertz is where it crosses over that 0 line, maybe a little bit different. But that's a pretty good place right there. The next thing I'm going to do is try and increase the intelligibility. And I know that in order to do that, I'm going to probably need to increase the volume of the range somewhere between maybe 1,500 hertz and 3,000 hertz, something like that. So what I'm going to do is grab this mid, I'm going to drop it up, I'm going to hold the shift key and make it kind of narrow, and I'm going to drag it back up. And then as I'm playing, I'm just going to drag this across the frequency band until I hear where it starts to sound more intelligible, and then I'll set the frequency, the width and the volume where I want it. This is just called sweeping the frequency band.
Bernie, I feel like somebody tapped me on the shoulder and whispered in my ear that they saw leadership potential in me when I was very young. I was, as an elementary school kid, I was helping ESL students who had just arrived to Canada. I was helping them, you know, learn the language and find what they needed and settle in. And this theme of was something that I was aware of at a young age. And so, I think that was those are my earliest memories of somebody looking me in the eye and being like, "You're a leader."
Okay, so by doing that, her S's are still not terribly intelligible, but they're a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and play this back so you can kind of A/B test that.
I think that was those are my earliest memories of somebody looking me in the eye and being like, "You're a leader. This is great." That was those are my earliest memories of somebody looking me in the eye and being like, "You're a leader. This is great." I think that was those are my earliest memories of somebody looking me in the eye and being like, "You're a leader."
Okay, so a little bit more intelligible. Now, in order to further increase the intelligibility without making it sound harsh, I'm also going to reduce some of the low end. I'm going to do that by grabbing this shelf, and I'm going to start up in probably that 700 hertz range or so, and I'm going to just kind of drag that range until I find where I want it, and then I'll set the level, okay?
Those are my earliest memories of somebody looking me in the eye and being like, "You're a leader. This is great. Way to go. Keep it up." And as I grew older, you know, went through school, got through high school, I was involved in a lot of clubs at my school, and that's when things kind of started to get gained a bit of momentum. But then I graduated early and I opted to take a gap year, and then I sort of pivoted and felt like I don't know exactly what I want to study, and I don't.
Okay, so I think that's a little bit better. Let me play back and A/B that.
But then I graduated early and I opted to take a gap year. I graduated early and I opted to take a gap year. But then I graduated early and I opted to take a gap year.
Okay, so then the only thing that remains is the high pass filter. Got that engaged right there, and I'm going to go ahead and move that to where it's kicking in more in that 150 to 200 range.
But then I graduated early and I opted to take a gap year. And then I sort of pivoted and felt like, I don't really know. I don't know exactly what I want to study, and I don't want to just jump in because it's what I'm supposed to do next. I don't want to just like follow this script and think that maybe it's going to work out. So I started to kind of like, don't want to just like follow this script and think that maybe it's going to work out. So I started to kind of like march to the beat of my own drum, and I found myself,
Okay, and that's how I would process it. Now, truth be told, I might spend a little bit more time on this, but I think this gets us to the basic idea. My goal here is to reduce the noise and the harshness while increasing the intelligibility, and it's always a little bit of a balance right there, but that's how I would do it with the stock plugin that's built into Hindenburg. Now, I'm hoping at some point to also have the time to make a video showing how I would do it with some other plugins, but this is how I would do it with this stock plugin right here in Hindenburg. Now, if you found this valuable, if you benefited from this, I would like it if you do three things for me. First, go ahead and give this a thumbs up. Second, if you have a comment, maybe a question, or maybe a future topic that you'd like to have covered, leave that in the comments for the video, either on YouTube or on the website. And third, if you know somebody who might benefit from this, go ahead and send it to them. You could share it on social media. That's great. But what really benefits is if you know somebody who's trying to do this right now and you go, hey, here's a video that'll show you exactly how to do it, especially if they're a Hindenburg user. That would be really valuable. If you'd like to connect with me personally, you can find me at toptieraudio.com. That's where you can find ways to connect with me on the social channels. And also, if you'd like to connect with us on Facebook, hindiusers.com is the place for that. Thanks so much for watching. Now go out there and make a great podcast.